Peace be upon you in God's mercy. Today, I bring you a story from the province of Relais during the Black Decade. The story's protagonist is named Hamid, from the municipality of Matmar in Relais. I will narrate the story as told by this man who lived through the Black Decade. Before we begin, do not forget to send prayers and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated with all new content. We still have more stories from the Black Decade from various regions of the country, God willing. The protagonist of the story says, "Since my childhood, I lived in difficult circumstances, in a poor family. My father worked some days and didn't work others, and we lived hand to mouth. He didn't have a steady job, and we were 3 siblings, my older brother, myself, and my younger sister. We grew up a bit until my father passed away in the early 1980s. At that time, we were young and still studying, and our expenses were minimal but challenging. After my father's death, my older brother started working for people to provide for our expenses. When he turned 21, he joined the police force and became responsible for the household expenses. He took good care of us and ensured we lacked nothing. He always told me, 'Focus on your studies and think about your future.' As for me, he would say, 'Take care of yourself, and whatever you need, I'll get it for you.' I continued my studies until I reached high school, but I failed the baccalaureate exam and couldn't continue my education after that.
After failing the baccalaureate, I started looking for work and found a job with a man who owned a shop selling spices and herbs. This man was kind and treated me like a father. I worked for him for a long time, about 4 or 5 years, until the Black Decade began in the early 1990s, 1991 to 1992. At that time, I started seeing groups of people coming to the shop, and they were strangers to the area. They would give me money and ask me to buy certain things, then return after an hour or 2. I would wait for them to leave. This situation continued for a long time until I noticed that the shop owner began to change. I noticed he started talking a lot about jihad, religion, and politics, topics he never discussed before. He began to influence me with his words, and I started thinking about the things he talked about. Over time, I became convinced by his ideas and decided to join the group that was fighting in the mountains to reclaim the people's rights and restore Islamic rule. The shop owner told me, "With time, you will reach a high position in the state." He convinced me with his words, and I agreed to join the group without much thought. When I decided to go to the mountains, he told me, "Don't tell anyone where you're going." He also said, "Tell your mother you're going to work in a distant province." I agreed and told my mother, "I'm going to work in a distant province, and I'll stay there for a long time." My mother agreed and said, "Go and work on your future." A few days later, a group of people came to the shop, and he introduced me to them, saying, "This is the young man I've been telling you about." I got into the car with them, not knowing where we were going. After 2 or 3 hours of driving, I noticed we entered a mountainous area. One of the men covered my eyes so I couldn't see the road, and we continued driving for about half an hour. When we arrived, we got out of the car, and I saw a large group of armed men, most of them bearded. One of them came to me and said, "This is our emir, and you must obey everything he tells you." I spent the night there, and the next day we began training in using weapons, and they started teaching us about our future goals. After a month or 2, we began moving from that place, and we would visit our families periodically. Every time I went home, I would meet my brother, who worked in the police. I would tell my mother, "When my brother comes, tell him I'll meet him at home." And so we would meet at home periodically. Over time, my brother noticed a change in me and began advising me, saying, "The path you're on is not good, and you're pushing yourself to ruin." But I was convinced by the group's ideas and didn't listen to his advice. On one occasion, the emir told me, We need to move to an area near Ain Defla, and we'll meet another group there to carry out an operation. We went there, and when we arrived, I was surprised to find that the emir of that group was my neighbor from the area where I lived. When he saw me, he recognized me, greeted me, and asked, "What are you doing here with this group?" Later that night, he came to me and said, "Your brother is still working in the police, and he's one of the oppressors. You're here with us in the mountains, and he's working with the state. Why didn't you advise him to quit his job and join us?" I replied, "Each of us has his own path. He works in one direction and I work in another. Everyone has their own life." But he wasn't convinced by my words and ordered the group to tie me up and beat me. He told them, "His brother works in the police and he might betray us and cause us big problems." They started beating me mercilessly, and then the emir told me, "We'll give you a chance. Either stay with us, or we'll send you home with a group of men, and you must go in and kill your brother and bring us his weapon. Otherwise, the group will kill both you and your brother." I had no choice, so I told them, "I accept. I'll kill him and bring the weapon." I returned home, and that night, I waited for my brother. When he arrived, I told him, "I'm tired, let's go to sleep." We went to the room, and I waited until he fell asleep. When I was sure he was asleep, I took the knife and stood over him. When he opened his eyes, he said to me, "Are you going to kill your brother?" I was confused, but I told him, "I have no choice. Either I kill you or they'll kill both of us." He started advising me, saying, "How far have you gone? You're pushing yourself to ruin." But I didn't listen to him, and I killed him in cold blood. This was extremely painful for me, and I began to feel deep regret. A few days later, I heard that my mother had died from the shock of seeing my brother dead in a pool of blood. From that moment on, I decided to leave this group, fled from the forest, and turned myself in to the state.